Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. The penultimate college football playoff rankings released, which means conference championship games are here. Texas plays Georgia in a rematch, while Penn State defaults into Indy against Oregon. How will the final bracket shake out? We've got college football playoff predictions and conference championship game previews and picks for you on today's show. My name is Blake Biscardi with David Wertheim, and we are proudly presented by the Silver Bulletin. David, most of the playoff bracket is set. Now it's just a matter of who is seated where. So what stands out to you most seeing the field and looking at the slate of games this week? Do you see any changes coming on Selection Sunday? Let's hop into that, and then we will back up a second to talk about Ohio State, Michigan, as it really impacted the field this week.
Yeah, the rankings, it's somewhat surprising, although nothing really outrageous, I would say. Obviously, Ohio State still getting a home playoff game sticks out. I don't anticipate that changing. They were ranked 6th, so they'd be the 8th seed hosting the 9 seed Tennessee. I think that makes sense. Ohio State's wins are a little better. Their losses are a little better. So it makes sense that they're ahead of Tennessee at this time. I will say Notre Dame being the 6th seed is interesting considering that loss to Northern Illinois. I know they've run through the rest of their schedule, but now that loss seems to be kind of circling back in the media sphere. A lot of people are talking about it and why it hasn't impacted them as much. The only thing I could see changing would be potentially a Penn State and Georgia flip, or at Georgia, if they lose, I could see Ohio State potentially jumping, dropping to 8. So still a couple of storylines to follow. Again, SMU's got a big game this weekend against Clemson. That could be, some people are saying that, SMU could be out with a loss here. And that is certainly interesting. I thought Rhett Lashley made a good point today. He said, look, if our team got COVID and didn't play in this game, we'd be in. And he's right. So that's something that, teams will have to consider based on the outcome of what happens to SMU if they were to lose to Clemson on Saturday. So I thought that was a really interesting point by Rhett Lashley. And that SMU is probably the biggest storyline to follow this weekend.
Yeah, I think you're right there. So let's take this bracket and kind of talk about groups of teams or specific teams here. And we'll start with Ohio State because that was the most notable game of last weekend, impacting the field. Just a total collapse against Michigan. David, you're watching this game, and we know Ohio State had an edge to them. We know they were juiced and ready to go for this game. We know the magnitude of this rivalry for both teams, both programs, both coaching staffs. It seemed like it was a coaching failure to me. I was there in the stadium. I know it translated that way on TV as well. Your thoughts on that game, what happened, and then how that impacts Ohio State as it pertains to now you have to get right and get past it and go play in a college football playoff, potentially starting with a home game.
Yeah, super disappointing loss. Maybe one of the most disappointing losses in program history. Now, I am an Ohio State historian and read up a lot about the 1969 Ohio State team that was coming off a championship that they won in 68. They were undefeated until that Michigan game and lost that Michigan game, and it kept them out of the Rose Bowl, which kept them out of the national championship discussion. And college football has changed. Obviously, that's not as big of a thing anymore, considering that there's 12 teams in the playoff now. It's not a 2-team bowl game for a championship. But that's what this kind of reminded me of, that kind of disappointing loss with a veteran team that has been there before, and they just weren't able to get it done. And Ryan Day, it just seemed like he wanted to win this game so bad, and you heard him throughout the week, and you heard him on Saturday, and he just wanted to win it so bad. And I think that caught up to him. I think they wanted to win it so bad that they shell shocked themselves and they just made too many mistakes, and it cost them in the end. And, even with just the horrible play calling, I'm going to call it like it is, they were a couple chip shot field goals away from winning that game, and they missed those field goals. So yeah, there's a lot to be corrected for sure. I think this is still a good football team. I think, honestly, this is a team that historically has played to the level of their competition. You look at a game like Nebraska, for example, when Ohio State won by 4 points at home to a Nebraska team that's probably the same caliber, maybe even a little worse than this Michigan team. And then they went on the road and beat Penn State. And then they went back home and crushed Indiana. So, it seems like a team that has been playing to the level of their competition for the most part. Even that game against Oregon, Was a very close game down in the final seconds. And so, yeah, I mean, this Ohio State team has always done that. And I would expect that to continue in the playoffs. I think they're going to put up a good fight, whoever they play.
David, I want to raise 2 points to you about this Ohio State game. The first one being, I think that the more I digest this game with Michigan, I actually think it was pretty identical to the Penn State game in terms of how Ohio State played. Against Penn State, they had the turnovers. They were costly. There were two of them, but they made their field goals. That was the difference. We were looking at that Penn State game and say, you know what? In spite of all these things happening, despite all these things going on, the turnover here, we're still up. They get a big turnover in the red zone. It was the same thing against Michigan. The difference was Ohio State's special teams lost them the game against Michigan, whereas it was the difference in the game against Penn State, which was played pretty evenly. And then two, Will Howard, I think they played around Will Howard a little bit. I think that he was rattled after that first interception because here we go again. I said it in my article. It was like a Penn State PTSD interception for him. I know the one against the Nittany Lions went for a pick six to start the game on his first throw. Eerily similar play. It was an out route. The corner jumps it. It was not there. Michigan gets a goal to go situation. They punch it in for a touchdown. So essentially still leads to a touchdown there. Same thing. I think it affected the play calling. We know it was windy there a little bit. It's harder to throw the ball in colder weather and the wind. I'm not going to cast full blame or give an excuse there with the weather, but it wasn't an ideal day to stretch the field vertically. But Ohio State still could have done it. And it looked like they decided against it because of Will Howard. And then also Michigan played with a lighter box because they were playing zone coverage. And Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham just controlled the run game. Ohio State couldn't do it. So the throwing lanes were not there for Will Howard as much as he's used to. And then Ohio State not being able to run the football then also affecting that.
I mean, it felt pretty insane to me. They were just doing the same thing over and over again, and it was not working. And I don't know why, and we'll never know why, probably. But honestly, I'm going to leave it with this. All the takes are out there. Everybody's had their opinion the last, 4 days or so. But the bottom line is one of these teams is going to keep playing and the other is going to be watching them on the couch. And Ohio State still has a chance to do something great this season. And I would expect them to give it their all. I mean, it would be crazy to expect anything less. So there's still a lot to play for Ohio State. This is one where it really sucks. It sucks so bad, but you have to put it behind you and get ready for Tennessee or whoever else you're going to end up playing.
So, David, if you look at this college football playoff field, it's pretty much set in terms of the national championship contenders. I don't think that if Clemson would some reason back into this not back into it, they'd actually earn it by winning the ACC. They could just go on a run and win the national championship. If you could pick three teams that you think have the best chance of winning the national championship, who would you choose?
Oregon obviously has to be number one. I think they're probably the most complete team right now, and they haven't lost. So I would say Oregon, as of right now, is probably the number one team that pretty much anybody would probably pick there in that regard. It gets a little tricky after that. I'm not seeing any really elite teams after that. If I had to pick, two more that I think could win the championship, I'm probably going to pick the two most talented rosters, and I think that's Texas and Ohio State. So those would probably be my other two teams. Texas, as of right now, is the number 2 seed. If they beat Georgia and Oregon wins, that'll hold. And then Ohio State, expecting to be the number 8 seed right now, maybe could move up a slot, maybe could move down a slot. But I would expect them to be the 8 seed. So I'd probably pick those 3 teams. Now, the problem is that if Ohio State holds at 8 and Oregon holds at 1, one of them is going to knock the other out. So that could lead to an easier road for somebody else. But those 3 teams right now, I think, are the best set up roster-wise to be able to go on a run and win the national championship.
Those are my 3 as well, and I think the 4th will be Georgia. And the reason I don't slot Georgia any higher is because Carson Beck has been too inconsistent this year for me. And if I have to take Carson Beck for 3 games, potentially 4 games to win a national championship and play clean football at the level he needs to, I just don't know if that's possible. Plus the fact Georgia really can't run the football either this year. So they're going to be more of a one-dimensional team than they've been in this playoff. And I don't know if they're going to go ahead and beat Texas this week and then have to deal with potentially an Ohio State or a Penn State or a Tennessee or an Oregon. I don't know if that road ever clears up for Georgia to the place where I can say I'm confident that this team is one of the 3 that could win the national championship. But I agree with you that Oregon's the most talented team right now, the way they've been playing. But the rosters of Texas and Ohio State, if they put it together, immediately they can win a national championship, and they can do it with the foot on the gas. And that's something that we all expect. So I expect to see two of those three teams in the title game, or at least in the Final Four there, depending on matchups. But another team I want to talk about, David, Notre Dame and Penn State. Those two teams sitting there on now. Notre Dame cannot be a top 4 seed. Penn State has a chance to earn a bye week by beating Oregon. Both of these teams are similar. Now, Notre Dame wins its first game of the season against Texas A&M and Kyle Field, big win. They go and lose to NIU, which we were just talking about. They've been really hot since then. Penn State not really having a big marquee victory. Can either of these two teams make a run to a championship in your mind there? Because it looks like right now this will be Notre Dame probably gets the 5 or the 6 seed, and then Penn State likely to be that 6, 7, potentially 8 seed, depending on how the committee views them with 2 losses.
Yeah, I'd say, just watching this year, I would say that Notre Dame probably has the better chance of making a run. I do think they're talented, and I think they've recovered well from that loss to Northern Illinois. But at the same time, they did lose to Northern Illinois, which is something that should never, ever happen for Notre Dame. Penn State, I'm just not sold on their playmakers. Tyler Warren is such a great weapon, but he cannot do it all by himself. So I wonder how they're able to handle that when teams are obviously going to be blanketing Tyler Warren. They do have some good running backs, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, been around a while. But I think Notre Dame, just based on their overall skill and overall playmakers at playmaker positions, I think they have just a little bit better chance to make a run. But don't sleep on Penn State. I do like their defensive line. Abdul Carter's a first-round guy. Obviously, everyone's been talking about him. Their secondary has quietly been more solid than people thought. So I think that Penn State is still a good football team, but if they were playing head-to-head right now, I would take Notre Dame for sure.
I'm with you on that take as well. I think with Penn State, I think they have good pieces in the right places. But we talk about this all the time. James Franklin in a big game. Can he beat Oregon? And then can he go win another big game and another big game and another big game? So that's where I look at with Penn State. And I think Notre Dame, it would be my 5th team that I would favor to win the national championship if I was making odds. So David, before we wrap this up and move to the picks and previews, you look at these conference championship games. Should the losers of these games drop in their rankings? Let's say Penn State and Georgia, since Oregon and Texas are favored, they lose. Penn State would get a second loss comparable to Ohio State. Ohio State has the head-to-head. Should they fall behind the Buckeyes because of that head-to-head result, similar to the way Alabama is ahead of Ole Miss and South Carolina? Or because they're playing in that game, do they get rewarded and maybe they slide a spot in the rankings? How do you see the committee viewing these conference championship game losers? SMU, another one we could talk about here, should they lose to Clemson, thinking they should be comfortably in the field.
Yeah, well, it brings me back to what I said and what Rhett Lashley said really earlier on the show, and which is that, if his whole team gets COVID and they're not playing this week, they're in and they're not moving. And he's right. And so it's really going to be interesting to see how the committee views this. And I don't know what they're going to do, and I don't know what the right answer is. But it'll be interesting because if you don't penalize the losers, then you also can't reward the winners, right? I mean, that would kind of be a double-edged sword and would kind of be unfair. So I don't know. Really don't know how they're going to do this without rewarding the winners or you got to do both. You can't do one or the other. As for me, what I think should happen, man, this is really tough. I think you probably should be penalized and the winner should probably be rewarded, honestly. I mean, you've earned your spot in this game for sure. I think a team like Penn State is in the playoff. They've been rewarded with a somewhat lackluster schedule. I'm using them just as an example here, Penn State specifically, because they have played that lackluster schedule and don't have that big win. They can get that this weekend, and that would earn them a bye. But if they lose this game, they should be penalized because they haven't played anybody. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you can look at it. You could take it on a case-by-case basis where a team like Penn State, who hasn't played anybody, might get a little less slack than a team like Georgia, who's had a little bit of a harder schedule than them. But I could see this going a number of different ways. And I think case by case might be the best way to do it, but you're still going to make some fan bases angry if you do it that way. So I don't know what the answer is, and I'm glad I'm not on the committee this year because it's going to be a lot of trial and error in the first year of this new system.
You're never going to please everybody, and I think we should look back to precedent from last year where Georgia gets upset by Alabama in the SEC championship game. They were the number 1 ranked team in the country. And then you have Florida State win, albeit no Jordan Travis, and they fall. Georgia also falls out of it. Alabama jumps into the college football playoff. So I think as much as the committee talks about, we place a lot of weight on conference champions. I agree with you that they should drop the losers of the conference championship games, not out of the field, but I do think that Penn State not having the head-to-head against Ohio State should be a factor. If not, I think South Carolina is a better team than Alabama objectively right now. How they're playing, they should be in over the Tide. But we can't because Alabama beat them. We saw that game. So I think that has to come into account. And then Georgia, I think, is the conundrum. I'm not going to be mad if they don't drop because they have already beaten Texas if they lose. So it's all right, we lost to them and we beat them, so they break even. They do have that third loss, so there is an argument to drop them there too. So I think Georgia's the more interesting case.
And almost a fourth loss. And
right.
Almost a fourth loss.
Right. So the Dogs are the more interesting case study of what the committee does with them. But they do have their hands full, and I don't know what they're going to do. That's what I think that they should do. So, David, before we move on here, Forever Game Day is a new partner to the show, and they believe in what we're doing around here. So as a return to all of you listeners, we've got you guys a discount code. So use code SILVER for 15% off your first order at forevergameday.com to get your favorite team's humor-based apparel today. David, we're going to move into our Saturday 7 picks, and we're going to do this a little bit differently. We're not going to preview the games first and then pick them. What we're going to do is go through the picks, and we'll preview them that way. We'll start with the MAC Conference Championship game. This is on Friday. It's Ohio U playing Miami of Ohio. The Redhawks 2.5-point favorites here. Who do you like in this game to win the MAC?
I like the Redhawks here. I like Coach Chuck Martin. I like what they're doing up there. Brett Gabbert, kind of the swan song here. He's been there forever, and that's a program that's really done well in the transfer portal as a group of 5 team, and you like to see it pay off. So I'm going to take the Redhawks here. A great season for OU, and obviously I have a lot of respect for those two schools growing up in the state. So that should be a fun one. I think Miami takes it, though.
I'm with you. I've got Miami, and I think they're going to win and cover it, less than a field goal. So I will take the Redhawks. We'll go to the Mountain West. This now has CFP implications here. Boise State firmly in the field already. They actually have a bye. They are 4-point favorites against UNLV. So who do you have in this one? Does Boise hold serve?
Probably has this one. It's been an interesting season for UNLV, right? I mean, they lose their quarterback after 2 or 3 after a couple of really big wins. They put in a new Mountain West Championship game. So what a job, Barry Odom. I know that his name has been connected to a bunch of other jobs, obviously formerly at Missouri, and good reason now that he's getting looks for those other jobs. So great season for UNLV. They should be very proud. I think Ashton Genty and the Broncos get this one done, though.
I'm with you here. I think they lean on Ashton Genty as they've done all season. Boise State's going to win and cover and potentially secure a bye in the college football playoff. We'll now go to the American. We've got Tulane, one of the hottest G5 teams in the country. They did get upset by Memphis the other week. They are playing Army in this matchup. David, do you think the Green Wave get this done, or do the Black Knights pull the upset here?
It's fun. I do think the Green Wave get it done. I like Army. Obviously, you're rooting for them, and they'll have that big showdown against Navy next week. And that's always fun as well. But I think in this case, I think I'm going to go with Tulane. And another guy who's done a really nice job in his first year there, John Sumrall, down there at Tulane. So, yeah, I like the Green Wave here. Another team that's done really well. You're noticing a theme here in the transfer portal. So I think Tulane gets this done over Army. But I wouldn't be sad, for America to get the win here for the Black Knights. But I do think Tulane gets it done.
Yeah, John Sumrall has done a phenomenal job at Tulane. He is one of the best G5 coaches in the country. So I will take Tulane to win this game and cover. I do think it'll be hard fought and competitive, but Tulane late pulls away here. Now go to the Big 12, another game where we don't know who's going in the playoff from this conference. So you got Iowa State, Arizona State, both teams out of the field. Who's going to play their way into it? I don't know if it's going to be enough to get them a bye, but the Sun Devils are favored by 2. David, who do you like in this game and by how much?
Yeah, this will be an interesting one. I'm taking Arizona State here, and I'm not sold on it. State with a really nice win last week over Kansas State. But Arizona State has been on some kind of run. And Kenny Dillingham, just another, he's done a fantastic job. And I think the Sun Devils, with their momentum right now, I think they end up taking this one. And we'll see if a team from the Big 12 gets in the playoff. I think they will. And I'm going Arizona State.
I do think that the Big 12 gets in the playoff. I'm going to take Iowa State in this game. I'm going to take the upset. I think that they are going to find a way to grind this one out late. I think Arizona State's been on a great run. They're a great story. Kenny Dillingham's done a phenomenal job. But I'm going to take the Cyclones to pull the upset here in the Big 12 championship game. Let's move now to the SEC. Georgia, Texas. We get the rematch. Longhorns favored by 2.5. David, give me your thoughts on this matchup before you make the pick. How does this rematch play into the hands of either school here? Which one do you think has the advantage?
Well, it's hard to beat the same team twice in any sport. Hard to beat the same team twice, especially in college football. So that would bode well, of course, for Texas this time. But this Georgia team, I don't think they're the same Georgia team that beat Texas. I think this is a struggling Georgia team. They probably shouldn't have pulled it out against Georgia Tech. So Texas, with all that in their favor, I'm leaning towards the Longhorns here. Again, hard to beat the same team twice. This Georgia team is a little off. Carson Beck, as you mentioned, inconsistent. And I think it comes down to that quarterback play. Quinn Ewers against Carson Beck. Which one of them will make less mistakes? I think that's the team that's going to win. And I think in this game, it's going to be Texas.
I'm with you in that. I think Quinn Ewers outplays Carson Beck, and I think Carson Beck has a very costly turnover that leads to points for Texas. That was a big story in the last game, was field position. I know Georgia got set up with a lot of short fields because of some turnovers by the Longhorns. I think they exercise those demons in this game. Texas is going to win this game. They're going to cover, and they're going to be the number 2 seed because the Big Ten championship game, I'll go first with this pick since I was just leading into it. Oregon is favored by 3.5 against Penn State. I think the Ducks win this game. I think they cover. I think Penn State in the first half is going to keep this close. I think this will be competitive, but Oregon's speed and space, that is going to be the difference in the second half. I think they're going to take over. It is going to be a game where we see Dylan Gabriel work the perimeter, and then they're going to be able to run the ball in the second half there, spread Penn State out. I just don't think Penn State has the horses on offense to keep up with this game. So Penn State is going to lose, and then I think they fall down to, I believe I have them as the 8 seed because they should fall behind Ohio State I'm going to have them at the 7 seed. They're going to fall one behind Ohio State, Georgia being the 8 seed.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I think that's pretty much exactly how I expect it to go. Penn State will give them a good half. Oregon's talent will be too much in the end. Ducks will pull away. Penn State falls a couple spots and still gets a home playoff game.
Yep, that's exactly how I see it here. And we will close this segment with the ACC championship game. Who expected Dabo Swinney and Clemson to be back in it? But here they are, Miami going down. So Clemson, SMU for the ACC championship game. SMU favored by 2.5. David, who you got?
Yeah, what another just absolutely classic Miami choke, right? I mean, all you had to do was beat Syracuse and you're in the playoffs, and they just can't do it. And it's just every year they find another way. And at this point, it's kind of funny. So, maybe Mario Cristobal can get it turned around here. They had a good season, 10-2 is nothing to sneeze at, but it's not going to be enough. In this game, I like Clemson. I like their experience. I like Dabo against Rhett Lashley here. I think SMU is really talented. Their schedule hasn't been great. And I think Clemson's experience, I think they have a little bit more talent on that roster, even though Dabo will not use the transfer portal. I still think Clemson gets this done.
Yeah, I've been looking at this game. I was on Clemson all week, and now today, for some reason, I decided I'm going to switch this pick to SMU. So I'll take Rhett Lashley and the Mustangs to pull the upset on paper, even though they're favored in Vegas. I will take SMU to win this game, cover, and then secure the 3 seed in the college football playoff. What a story it is for the Mustangs. So, David, lots of conference championship games coming up this week. We've got Selection Sunday on Sunday. We will have a full reaction for everybody after those picks come out. The brackets will be made official at noon on ESPN. So we will have thoughts there. Stay tuned to social media. Enjoy the weekend of college football. This is the last one of the quote unquote regular season before we get to the playoff. So we appreciate you listening to today's episode. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Leave us a review. It really helps out our show. And check us out on social media at Saturday Cadence for more content throughout the week. And remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. For David Wertheim, I am Blake Biscardi. We will see you next time. God bless.